Episode 97 this week we cover The Skin of Evil. This one, the most season 1 episode of all of season 1. It was a good idea on paper, potentially executed not very well. It was okay-ish, but if they would have had this idea, say 2 or 3 seasons later, I think the execution would have been much crisper. They would have had a better episode. But essentially, the Enterprise is en route to meet up with the shuttlecraft carrying Counselor Troy, who had been at a conference. They took the time to shut down the warp engines to do some maintenance. Then they get a message from the shuttlecraft saying they've had massive engine failure and they're out of control. So Picard calls engineering and he's like, how long until we get warp engines back? And this engineer of the week, one of the season 1 engineers that was rotating, who was very proud of his name because he always used his full name. He'd say, this is Leland T. something or other. And then he told Captain Picard it'll be 2 hours before we get the warp engines back. Picard's like, fine, have it done in 20 minutes. And he's like, okay, I will. Besides, I'm Leland T. whatever. And so they hooked up the warp engines, but it was too late. The shuttle spun into this planet out of control. So they get to the planet. It was supposed to be uninhabited. Picard sent an away team down to pick up the shuttle crew. They get down there, and this massive oil slick had a consciousness and could shapeshift to a degree, and it wouldn't let him pass. And they're like, we need to get to the crew members. And he's like, I don't care, I'm not letting you there. And they're like, come on, let us through. And he was like, no. And Tasha Yar finally was like, well, this is silly, I'm just going to go over there and get to the injured crew, and it'll be fine. And he shoots like a bolt of energy, and Tasha's dead. They tried to revive Tasha for several minutes. Didn't work, she's dead. So Picard promotes Mr. Worf to head of security, and he tells Riker, okay, take the away team back down. And Riker's like, are you coming, Worf? And he's like, no, I think I'll stay up here. I'm fine up here. You don't need a warrior. I'll just stay on the bridge. Very un-Worf-like, but that's what he did. The away team goes back down, and this oil slick is messing with them the whole time. He's like telling Troy he killed Tasha Yar, and she already knows, and he's like, they're afraid of me, and she already knows, and so forth and so on. He's got Troy upset. When the away team gets back there, he messes with them. He shoots LaForge's visor off of his face, then moves it around when Data tries to help him find it. He makes Data put a phaser to the head of LaForge and Crusher, and he's like, okay, you choose one of them to shoot. And then Data's like, well, I'm not in control, so I won't be affected because I know I'm not the one that's firing. And he's like, fine. And he's getting madder and madder. Up on the Enterprise, Worf and Wesley Crusher think they see a pattern with the energy that the oil slick is producing, so they're like, maybe we can use that to our advantage. And so they're coming up with a game plan, but then Riker, he gets sucked into the oil slick, and Data's like, I don't know if Riker's alive or not. And Picard's like, well, I'll beam you up, and the oil slick's like, if you do, then they'll all die. So the away team has to stay there. Picard goes down there, and they go back and forth. He eventually spits Riker out of the oil slick. Riker's just covered in oil. And they get him out of there. And then Picard goes to see Troy. They have a conference. And Picard goes to the oil slick. Armis is his name, but really it's just an oil slick named Armis. And Picard's like, okay, I have the means to take you away from this planet if that's what you want. And the oil slick's like, yeah, I was with some of my buddy pals, the other oil slicks with consciousness, And then they deserted me. I want to get off this rock. And Picard's like, yeah, I can help you out with that. And he's like, great, I'll let you take Troy. So they get Troy out of there, and Picard's like, yeah, I'm not helping you. You got to stay here. And Picard gets out of there, and they take off. Then at the very end, one of the most poignant scenes in the entire history of the Next Generation, when they go to the holodeck, and there's a holographic version of Tasha Yar basically saying her goodbyes to all of the bridge crew. Like, she addressed them individually to say what her favorite memories were and what they meant to her. And then that was the episode. So, some interesting notes here. This was Denise Crosby's final appearance as Tasha Yar. She filmed one other episode, the one we covered last time, Symbiosis, after this because she saw the script ahead of time, enjoyed it, and she has to be part of that episode. So even though she filmed that after this episode, they aired the one that she died in at a different time. But this was the final appearance of Tasha Yar. Basically, Denise Crosby, towards the middle of this first season, saw that her character was going to be the equivalent to her and just say frequencies open and things of that nature and just kind of be there. She didn't want to just kind of be there and not have anything to do, so she has to be let out of her contract. So they let her out of her contract, and she left the series before the end of season one, although Denise Crosby would return in some time travel shows, and then she would play her own daughter later in the series. So she'd make sporadic appearances as both Tasha Yar and her own daughter. Wesley Crusher's actor Will Wheaton said that, in his opinion, Mr. Worf and Tasha Yar were basically the same thing, but he said since Michael Dorn, who plays Worf, stuck it out the first season, they eventually started giving him more to do and making things more interesting. So Will Wheaton thinks that Denise Crosby made a mistake and should have stuck it out, but she left the series, and he said that was the difference. Also in this one, the last of the rotating engineers, Leland T. whatever his name was the last engineer of the week before they promoted LaForge in season 2 to full-time chief engineer. First time they'd had the full cast in the same episode for a few episodes. They usually had one or another cast member absent for the past 4 or 5 episodes. They were all back for this one, even though Wesley Crusher was barely in it. Deanna Troi was in it some, but her part was also still kind of minimal. Also, the first episode when Worf took over as the chief of security, even though they said at the time it was temporary, he was chief of security through the rest of the series. Oh, also interesting, it was Marina Sirtis' actual crying in the final scene. She wasn't just acting, she and Denise Crosby were buddy pals, so she was very upset to see her go. So she was actually in tears at the end of that scene. And pretty much that's episode 97.